Hello everyone, this is Isidore, and in this episode I'm going to show you how to set up a basic military and how to order it around. While you can hypothetically just use drawbridges to seal yourself off from any potential outside threats, as I showed you in an earlier part of this guide, sometimes you need to have some dwarves ready to commit acts of unspeakable violence. For this, you need to set up a military so your fort can deal with any creature that can get past your defenses, or any creature that simply cannot be dealt with otherwise, like forgotten beasts or titans. The military system of Dwarf Fortress is fairly complex, but I'll stick to the basics that let you create soldiers and march them to where they need to go. As your knowledge of the system grows, you can do more elaborate setups, but this is a beginner's guide. I don't want to do a deep dive into that, otherwise we're going to be here for a while. This video should give you more than enough information on how to adequately defend your fort. So, first off, in order to get our military set up, we have to decide what type of squad we want to set up. Our options are a light melee unit called leather armor in-game that uses leather armor and a melee weapon, a heavy melee unit called metal armor in-game that uses metal armor and a melee weapon, or an archer unit that uses leather armor and crossbows. The light melee unit is mainly for forts that lack weapon-grade metals for armor production, as armor production is pretty metal-hungry and can be safely ignored if you have plenty of ore on your site. The only advantage this unit type has is movement speed, which does not at all make up for the difference in protection between leather armor and metal armor. A heavy melee unit is your go-to for melee dwarves, who are generally your most durable and deadly. Metal armor, especially high-quality dwarven steel, will render your dwarves mostly impervious to dangerous wildlife, and will make them a lot harder to injure if fighting armed, sapient enemies. In fact, a well-trained squad can and will function as a dwarven blender, and will tear a sieging army up in short order. Archers, or rather crossbow dwarves, are your ranged unit. These are a bit more utility focused, as while they're pretty deadly, they usually aren't as dangerous as a melee dwarf of similar skill. Instead, crossbow dwarves mainly serve to quickly kill enemies that would be utterly deadly to melee squads, such as mega beasts who will often squash or shred your melee dwarves in one attack, or titans/forgotten beasts with very dangerous abilities, like poison gas or fire breath. And you can also use fortifications, which crossbow dwarves can shoot through, but enemies cannot move through, to set up interesting defenses. You don't need metal to kit these guys out, but wooden or bone bolts will not prove very useful against either armored foes or certain monsters with exceptionally tough flesh. So, metal crossbows and bolts are recommended. It can take a while to forge armor for an entire squad of dwarves, so we can make a squad of crossbow dwarves to begin with. These fine lads will protect our fort from any threat, as long as they can avoid letting it get too close. First, we'll set up some work orders to create enough leather armor and weaponry to fill up the squad, as well as some furniture that we'll need to set up their barracks. Order a weapon rack, your choice of material, and 10 chests, also your choice of material. To armor our dwarves, we need 10 leather armors, 10 leather helms, 20 leather gloves, 10 leather leggings, 20 leather high boots, 10 leather shields, 10 leather quivers, 10 leather water skins or metal flasks, and 10 leather backpacks. Make sure you have a tanner's workshop and a leather workshop set up so your dwarves can actually make these. You might have to do some butchering/hunting/trading to get enough leather to craft all of these, as this is a pretty tall order. Lastly, you will want to order some metal crossbows and metal crossbow bolts. Even the worst grade metals will outperform wood or bone any day of the week. What metals do you use? Well, the metals you can use to craft weapons are, in order of bad to best, silver, copper, iron, bronze, bismuth bronze, steel, and the stuff you get from digging greedily and deeply. This list is pretty comprehensive, but there are some exceptions. Bronze and bismuth bronze are identical, save that bismuth bronze is more valuable. And iron and bronze have very similar performance, to the point where they're almost interchangeable. Steel is the stuff you can usually easily mass produce that outperforms everything else. So if you want to get a high quality military going early, I'd go for steel. Steel is good enough that you'll never need to replace it, even if you have better materials. To make steel, you obviously need some furnaces, some charcoal or regular coke or coal, iron bars, and flux-stone. You will need to use these ingredients to make some pig iron bars, and then combine the same ingredients again with pig iron to create steel. If you know you started off on a site that contains flux-stone, but you can't find it near the surface, you can usually find marble if you dig deeply enough, but be warned that digging deeply is dangerous. Some sites will also lack flux-stone entirely, in which case you can only really get steel off of the merchant caravans, and you might want to pick some other metal to craft weapons out of. Once you figure out which metal you want to use, craft 10 metal crossbows and 30 metal crossbow bolts. Remember, you'll need a weaponsmith for this, as well as a metalsmith's forge, as well as some furnaces to melt down any ore you have or any metal items you have into metal bars. Once all of that is made, let's go set up our squad. First, press N to go into the noble screen and scroll down to the title of Militia Captain. These guys are your squad leaders, and you'll need to assign one for every squad you want to set up. How do you pick a dwarf to lead your squad? Well, there's a few ways. The easiest is to just pick a dwarf that doesn't have any useful skills and toss them into the fires to see if they'll survive in their first few engagements or not. But this can result in a lot of unnecessarily lost lives, so here's a good way to select your potential recruits. Boot up Dwarf Therapist. It'll have the information you'll need to make a good selection. First off, look at your dwarf's genders. These indicate both their gender and sexuality. The best types of dwarf to recruit to your military have their gender colored gray, which means they are asexual or aromantic, have a double icon indicating homosexuality, or are some variety of male. In that order. The reason for this is not because of any political views I may or may not hold. No, seriously, I assure you this is not the case. It is because 1. Asexual/aromantic dwarves will not get married, I think, don't quote me on that, and will not have children, thus meaning they will not have a spouse or child that will get upset if they die in battle. Homosexual dwarves will also never have children and thus have fewer relatives who will get upset if they die in battle. Male dwarves who have children, unlike their female equivalents, will not carry their baby around wherever they go. Yes, this includes combat. It's very upsetting for everyone involved when you send your army to go fight a giant black bear, only for it to bite the head off of the baby that one of your female soldiers was carrying into battle. Next, look at your dwarf's preferences by hovering over their names. Any dwarf who is some form of bored due to not having gotten in a fight in a while is a perfect candidate for a permanent role in the military. If you can't find any of those, dwarves who are bored due to not having been able to practice a martial art for too long will also do well, though you might want to rotate them out if they get too stressed. Finally, you want to navigate to the military tab. Any dwarf who has prior experience in fighting skills, particularly the Marks dwarf skill, will make for an above average recruit for a ranged squad. In case you have dwarves who have suffered previous injuries, it's also important not to put any dwarf who has lost, for instance, the ability to walk, to see, or to grasp items in your military for obvious reasons. You can check this in-game by pressing Z and navigating to the Health tab. Any dwarf with permanent injuries will have them listed here. You may have to navigate left or right with the arrow keys to get to the correct health tab, but luckily the codes dwarves will have on their health profile have a legend displayed at the bottom. Just navigate to the correct tab and you'll see the translation of the code. Sadly, this list can get quite long, but it's the best way to figure out if a dwarf is too crippled to serve in the military or not. So, let's say we found our candidate. First we go into the noble screen, find them in our list of dwarves for the position of a militia captain, and then grant them the title. This title doesn't require anything, so don't worry about needing a study or a dining room or anything like that, but the title also doesn't do anything by itself, so keep that in mind. Next, open the military screen with M. There should be a militia captain listed on the screen in front of you. Scroll down to that entry and press C to create a squad, but then select the archer option to set up your Marks dwarf squad. You will now be given an option of any of the 3 basic uniform types we discussed earlier. Select Archer to make a squad of Crossbow Dwarves. Now you have your first squad created. It'll be given a randomized name, though you can change that if you want, it really doesn't matter. If you now select that squad in the military screen, you can see it has 9 vacant slots in addition to the militia captain. We want to fill up all these slots with new recruits to ensure that we have enough soldiers to respond to any kind of threat. The easiest way to assign new recruits to an existing squad is through Dwarf Therapist. Find any potential recruits as per the criteria I explained before, then right-click them, navigate to Assign to Squad, and then select our new squad of Crossbow Dwarves. This will add their new assignment to Dwarf Therapist's queue. Fill up the entire squad. By doing this, you'll know you're done when it won't let you add any more dwarves to that squad. Then click Commit Changes. Now you have a full squad of Crossbow Dwarves. However, you also need to give your squad somewhere to train, otherwise they'll go into battle without even knowing how to throw a decent punch or how to avoid one. Remember the weapon rack we ordered earlier? Dig out a decent sized room and place the weapon rack and the 10 chests inside. You can also order some doors and build those on the entrance to the room for completeness. Once built, press Q and select the weapon rack, and press R to create a barracks and use the plus and minus keys to enlarge the room until it encompasses the entire area you want to use at a barracks. Then press Enter to create the room. Next, select the crossbow squad in the list shown on the profile of the barracks. You presumably don't have to navigate to do this since it's your only squad. And press T to have your archers use that as a training room, and Q to have your dwarves use the chests here to store their equipment. Now you've got your barracks all set up. Your dwarves will occasionally use this to perform combat exercises to become more efficient warriors. However, we need one extra step to set up our crossbow dwarves for success. Dig out an additional room next to your barracks, at least 5 tiles wide and 5 tiles long. Then build 5 archery targets using B, then capital A at the end of the room. Once these are built, select each of them and perform the following steps for every single one. Create a room based on the archery target, even if another archery target already did this. Select the crossbow dwarf squad and press T to have them use the newly created archery range for training. Use WASD to select the direction the dwarves will be shooting in. For instance, in my example, I built my archery targets in the bottom of the room, meaning my dwarves will be shooting from the top of the room towards the bottom, thus requiring me to set the shooting direction with S. Now our crossbow dwarves will be using our new archery range to practice their accuracy. However, we don't want them to use our precious metal bolts for this, we want them to use throwaway bolts for this, like wooden bolts. In order to get them to do this, we have to go back to the military screen with M and then the ammunition screen with F. Navigate to your new squad, they'll have only one thing listed. Bolts 250. This means they'll try to keep 250 crossbow bolts of any kind on themselves. These bolts are marked with both C and T, capital C and T, meaning they'll use them for both combat and training purposes. Select these bolts and press capital M. This lets us set up the materials these bolts are made out of. Select metal, then select the bolts again and press capital T. This will force our dwarves in this squad to use metal bolts for combat. Next, press C and add another unit of crossbow bolts. This will add another 100 crossbow bolts to their inventory, but these are also untyped and set to both C and T. This time we will set these bolts to wood, and while selecting the wooden bolts, we'll press C, so they will only be used for training purposes. Remember to also order like 30 wooden bolts in the manager screen, in order to provide your squad with the requisite bolts that they will need for training. That was a lot, but now our crossbow dwarves are entirely set up to not only defend our fort, but to train as well. Now let's go over the last part of how to use your military, giving them commands. When you need to order your squad around, press S. This will bring up a list with all your current squads listed. Note that unlike previous menus, bringing this one up does not pause the game, so be wary of that. Press A to select your crossbow dwarves. If you now press M and select a tile, your crossbow dwarves will attempt to arm themselves if they aren't armed already, and will move to that location to stand guard. You can move them around with this command, or let them stand guard there indefinitely. Be warned that while they will not starve themselves by standing guard, they will become pretty unhappy if they are forced to do so for long periods of time. If you want to order them to attack something, you can either move them close to the thing that you want them to attack, or you can select the squad again in the squad menu and press K instead of M. Then just maneuver your cursor to the tile with the enemy you want to kill, and then hit enter to select them. If you want to kill multiple enemies, press R first and you can designate an area. Upon designating an area like this, your dwarves will go out and kill every creature that was in the designated area. Ignoring citizens of your fort, essentially they won't kill your dwarves or their pets or animals belonging to your fort, but they will attack hostiles, wildlife or visitors to your fort that were caught in that rectangle. If you want to cancel a given order for any reason, just select the squad and press O. This will clear any standing orders the squad has. Also note that the orders given to a squad of dwarves override burrow restrictions. So if you put your whole squad on red alert to force them into your safety burrow, you can order your military dwarves to guard the entrances to your fort, and they'll ignore burrow restrictions while doing so. This way you can keep your civilians safe without getting your soldiers trapped in the safety zone. If you're having trouble getting your entire squad to move when you order them to, you can also try setting your squad to alert in the military alerts menu. This causes the orders that you give your military dwarves to override any other jobs that they might do other than ones that are absolutely mandatory for them to survive. Now, when ordering dwarves to fight something, it's important to note that you won't have much control over them. When a military dwarf spots an enemy, they will start attacking it, regardless of any new orders you may give the squad. You can try to override their combat by cancelling any standing orders the squad has, and then forcing your dwarves to go into a burrow, but whether or not your dwarves will be able to disengage depends heavily on the enemy. Wildlife might allow your dwarves to back out of combat, but goblins and trolls will likely chase your dwarves down and lock them in melee so they can't escape. As such, if you're sending your soldiers the order to move on an enemy of any kind, ensure they are prepared to fight it out if it comes to that, as you probably won't be able to order your soldiers to retreat. This was a fairly long video, and honestly I've just scratched the surface of what you can do with your military. However, with this information, and maybe some clever constructions of walls, bridges, traps and fortifications, you'll be able to defend your fort from almost any kind of attack. With this video, I conclude my beginner's guide to Dwarf Fortress. From here on out, you should be able to figure out the rest yourself, though I will be making more videos in the future explaining more advanced parts of the game. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to help support my channel, and there's a link to my Patreon in the description below if you want to help me even more to create content like this in the future. Regardless of what may await you and your dwarves, never forget this wisdom from Armok himself. Losing is fun.